The Galactic Council Chamber was a cathedral of voices. Suspended above the star-wreathed capital world of Sithara, the chamber's vaulted arches stretched toward a transparent dome through which entire nebulae swirled. Delegates from over 100 civilizations filled the concentric tiers, each bearing the insignia of their species' power. Some sat cloaked in silken veils, others towered in exoskeletal armor, and still others shimmered with holographic projections. All were here for the same reason: the question of humanity. It had been 70 years since the Terrans those soft-skinned primates from Salhad joined the galactic stage. In that time, their influence had spread like wildfire, far outstripping their meager numbers. Every time the Council believed it understood them, the humans shattered expectations. Victories won against impossible odds. Diplomacy spun from failure into triumph. Survival where no other species could endure. The reports piled higher with each cycle, and whispers became too loud to ignore. The High Speaker, Vekthar of the Draelith, was the first to voice what many thought. He stood, towering, his obsidian scales catching the chamber light, his fangs bared in disdain. "Humans are not the strongest," he declared, his guttural voice echoing through the chamber. "The Varn break mountains with their fists. The Drekt crush starships with their war-born bodies. Terrans. They are fragile things, brittle-boned, unable even to survive the gravity of many worlds. To suggest they rival us in strength is insult enough." Murmurs of agreement rippled among the warriors' delegations. The Varn envoy slammed a clawed fist onto his dais in thunderous affirmation. But another voice rose, sharp and chittering, from the Sleth delegation. Ambassador Yethalani, a lithe insectoid, raised her serrated forelimbs in protest. "No. The danger of humans does not lie in their speed either. My kind can cross planes faster than their machines. Our reflexes are honed to fractions of a second. Yet I have faced humans in battlefields and duels. They move slow. They strike clumsy. How then do they win?" Her compound eyes glittered with frustration. Their mandibles clicked in agitation from the crystalline dais of the Zeruli delegation. The air resonated with a soft, haunting chime. The Zeruli did not speak with mouths, but through vibrations, their crystalline bodies singing with perfect clarity. They are not the most intelligent. Even their greatest thinkers cannot rival our logic collectives, nor the raw mental firepower of the Zenth symbiotes. The human brain is limited, prone to bias, crippled by emotion. Statistically, their decisions should doom them more often than not. Yet somehow, they endure. The chamber erupted with noise. Dozens of species, each with their own grievances, hurled theories and accusations across the floor. Some claimed humans were reckless to the point of madness. Others argued that they relied on luck, a string of coincidences too absurd to last. A few even whispered of darker forces' divine favor, perhaps, or a hidden technology not yet revealed. Through it all, one figure sat silent at the edge of the assembly. Ambassador Marcus Hale of Earth was not imposing by galactic standards. He had no carapace, no fangs, no wings, or bioluminescence. His hair was streaked with silver, his face weathered with lines, his form unarmored and unadorned. Compared to the resplendent displays of the other delegations, he looked plain, almost fragile, and yet, when his gaze swept the chamber, it carried a weight that silenced even the boldest voices. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He only listened. It was that silence that unsettled the council most. For many races, silence was weakness, an inability to counter or respond. But the galaxy had learned a different truth about humans. Their silence was rarely ignorance. It was calculation. The Sleth ambassador faltered mid-sentence, mandibles clicking nervously. The Zeruli song grew softer, uncertain. Even Vekthar, towering and proud, shifted on his taloned feet as though the human's quiet eyes had pinned him in place. The debate dragged on.
All looping in circles.
No one could agree on a single explanation. Every weakness humans possessed seemed to mask a hidden strength. Every flaw became a weapon. and every empire that dismissed them found itself somehow undone finally. The High Speaker slammed his claw against the marble dais, demanding order. "Enough speculation," he roared. "If we are to face humanity as a threat, then we must know what is the one thing they excel at. What is it they do better than anyone?" All eyes turned, inevitably, to the human ambassador. Marcus Hale did not move. He did not speak. He only sat in silence, hands folded, expression unreadable. And in that silence, a shiver spread across the chamber, because the council had seen this before, long before the council convened its heated debate. Humanity had been tested again and again by those who sought to measure, classify, and ultimately dismiss them. To understand why the council was so divided, one had only to look back at the earliest encounters. The first trial came from the Kuln, species that thrived in brutal environments. Their homeworld was swept by acid winds and scorching storms, and they prided themselves on endurance unmatched in the galaxy. When humanity stumbled onto their territory through exploration, the Kuln saw a chance to prove superiority. A trial of endurance was declared. A group of humans was abandoned on Veros Prime, a world infamous for its toxic rains and razor-sharp crystal fields. The Kuln expected them to perish within a day. They did not. Instead, the humans scavenged. They tore their clothing into strips, binding wounds and fashioning makeshift filters against the choking air. They dug pits and covered them with shards of crystal to trap condensation, collecting what little water the planet could yield. When the Kuln returned after 3 days, expecting corpses, they found the humans alive, exhausted, scarred, but standing. Some had even begun to map the terrain, preparing crude shelters against the storms. It unsettled the Kuln deeply. Survival was expected of them. But the humans? They were not supposed to endure. The second trial came from the Threx, a warrior race that gloried in duels. Their champions wielded strength that could shatter stone. And they saw humanity's lean bodies and fragile frames as laughable. They issued challenges to prove their dominance. At first, the outcome seemed inevitable. In direct combat, human fighters were thrown down, bones broken, weapons shattered. But then, the humans changed the game. One human, cornered and beaten, tore the chain from a decorative banner and swung it like a flail. Another ripped loose a chunk of flooring and used it as a shield. In the third duel, when disarmed, a human spat sand into a Threx's eyes before grappling him to the ground. The Threx were outraged. To them, honor meant purity, weapon against weapon, strength against strength. But the humans seemed incapable of separating survival from ingenuity. By the 10th duel, the Threx had learned a bitter truth. Every human loss was temporary. The moment they understood a weakness, they turned it into a new strength. "Nothing in their world is not a weapon," one Threx general muttered after the trials. It was meant as an insult. Instead, it became the first recorded warning about human nature. The third trial was subtler. The Siari, masters of logic and abstract thought, invited humans into contests of intellect. Their games were intricate simulations of galactic conquest, requiring foresight, calculation, and flawless logic. Against such brilliance, the humans should have faltered. And indeed, at first they did. For 20 moves, humans stumbled, their choices messy, their strategies incoherent. The Siari laughed, leaving the primates were out of their depth. Then the unexpected happened. Human moves began to shift. What seemed like chaos revealed sudden patterns. Risky gambits, dismissed as foolish, paid off in ways no model could predict. A human would sacrifice entire fleets in the simulation, leaving the Siari baffled only for that sacrifice to open the path to victory 3 turns later, one frustrated Siari. Analysts summed it up in despair. They are not playing to win, as we define it. They are playing to learn. And once they learn, the outcome is decided. Each trial left scars not on the humans, but on those who tested them. The Kuln grew wary of their stubborn endurance. The Threx began to fear duels with unarmed humans more than with armed foes. The Siari, most prideful of all, withdrew from human contact entirely, their perfect logic unable to process the illogic of victory through failure. And yet, despite these warnings, the greater galaxy continued to underestimate them. The reports trickled in, but they were dismissed as anomalies, exaggerated tales from border skirmishes. Surely humans could not truly be so adaptable. Surely their victories were flukes, their survival temporary. But those who had faced humanity firsthand whispered a different truth. Other species seek perfection, one Colne elder recorded in her final journal. Perfection of body, mind, or spirit. But humans? They seek something else. They seek change. They embrace failure and rise stronger because of it. That is their gift, and it is terrifying. The warnings were ignored. So when war came, when the mighty Voran Empire turned its gaze towards Sol and demanded Earth's submission, the galaxy watched with smug certainty. Humanity would fall. It had to. But those who had seen the first encounters, the Colne, the Threx, the CR, they knew better. They remembered the strange fire in human eyes when defeat loomed. They knew the galaxy was about to learn the same lesson the hard way. The day the Voran Empire declared war on Earth, most of the galaxy believed the conflict would be over before it began. The Voran were one of the great powers of the Outer Arms, their empire spanning dozens of star systems. Their fleets were vast and disciplined, their armies bred for war across generations. Their conquests were methodical. They descended upon weaker civilizations, shattered defenses, enslaved populations, and absorbed their resources. Against such a force, Earth barely a century into spaceflight was nothing. At least, that was the assumption. The Voran fleet arrived in Sol with the confidence of predators. Hundreds of warships blotted out the stars, their blackened hulls bristling with weapons. They demanded Earth's immediate surrender, broadcasting across every frequency. Kneel, Terrans. You are outmatched. Submit, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and you will suffer. Earth refused. The first strikes were brutal. Orbital defense stations, old and underpowered, were reduced to slag in minutes. Cities were bombarded from orbit, their skylines torn apart in fire and dust. The Voran advanced troops landed in waves, encased in armor that shimmered with energy shields. Armed with plasma rifles that could cut through steel by all measures, Earth was finished, but something strange happened. Instead of collapsing into despair, humanity shifted. At first, the resistance was scattered civilians arming themselves with whatever they had. Farmers wielded hunting rifles against towering soldiers. Dock workers turned cranes and forklifts into weapons. In mining towns, explosives meant for tunneling became improvised traps. The Voran dismissed it as desperation. Yet, as days turned to weeks, the resistance hardened. Every defeat became a lesson. Every loss taught humans how to strike harder the next time. On the plains of Kansas, Voran infantry found themselves ambushed, not by soldiers, but by farmers who had converted irrigation systems into flamethrowers. In the shattered remains of Berlin, survivors rigged entire apartment blocks with explosives, collapsing them onto patrols. In the mines of South Africa, tunnels were sealed deliberately, suffocating whole units underground. The Voran commanders were perplexed. No other species fought this way. Most civilizations resisted in predictable fashion-pitched battles, defensive formations, desperate pleas for aid. Humans refused to play by the rules. Even in orbit, the adaptability was shocking. Engineers took half-destroyed satellites, rewired them, and turned them into kinetic bombardments. One Voran cruiser was ripped apart when a decommissioned space station, loaded with scavenged fuel cells, was set adrift and detonated on impact. Within weeks, the war was no longer a one-sided massacre. It was chaos. Captured Voran equipment was refitted into something alien and dangerous. Plasma rifles stripped down and modified with scavenged components. Power armor turned into prototypes for human soldiers willing to risk wearing gear that might kill them as often as protect them. Entire vehicles cobbled together from wreckage rolled out of underground workshops ugly, unstable, but devastating. The humans did not just fight. They learned every failed ambush refined the next. Every fallen city taught survivors new tricks. Every battle lost became a blueprint for victory elsewhere. The Vorin commanders began to panic. What was supposed to be a swift conquest had devolved into a grinding war of attrition, one the Empire had never faced before. They tried to adapt, but their doctrine was rigid. Their soldiers trained only for control, not creativity. For every new tactic they deployed, humans responded with something unexpected, something learned from failure. In the ruins of Tokyo, a Vorin general was overheard before his execution by a resistant cell. These humans, they do not fear death. They use it. Every corpse is a lesson, every defeat a weapon. How do you crush something that only grows sharper when broken? Across the galaxy, reports filtered in. The Council, once so certain of Earth's destruction, grew uneasy. The human ambassador, Marcus Hale, received encrypted updates from his world. He read them in silence, his weathered face betraying nothing, though his eyes darkened with every line. The tide had not yet turned. Earth still bled. Millions were dead, cities burned, and the Vorins still controlled orbit. But the war had already shifted in ways no one had foreseen. Humanity was no longer the prey, it was the predator sharpening its claws. For the first time in their empire's history, the Vorin felt something they had never known in conquest: fear, and in that fear the truth began to dawn across the galaxy. Humanity might not have the strongest bodies, the sharpest minds, or the fastest reflexes. But in the crucible of war, they revealed what they did better than anyone. The Galactic Council Chamber was never quiet. It was designed to echo with voices, a place where hundreds of species debated, schemed, and bargained in ceaseless cacophony. But when the first confirmed reports of the Vorin defeat reached the capital, silence fell like a shroud. It began with whispers, rumors dismissed as exaggerations. A Vorin fleet crippled by primitive sabotage, a legion lost to what sounded like civilian resistance. The Council laughed at the notion. Humans had no fleets worth the name, no armies trained for galactic war. The Vorin Empire was invincible. Then came the data. Entire cruisers destroyed not by superior firepower, but by improvised kinetic strikes-dead satellites repurposed into devastating projectiles. Supply lines ambushed, not by armies, but by bands of miners and mechanics who somehow dismantled war convoys with crude explosives. Ground troops lost to traps that no sane strategist would have considered viable. And worst of all, the humans were learning faster with each engagement. Within weeks, what should have been a brief conquest had dragged into a grinding campaign. Within months, the unthinkable had happened. Human resistance forces seized a Vorin battleship, refitted it, and unleashed it back against its creators. The council chamber quivered with outrage and disbelief. This is impossible. The crystalline tones of the Zeruli delegation sang, shards of their form vibrating in panic. The Vorin fleets have stood for millennia. No primitive world can reduce them to this state. The data is clear, hissed Ambassador Yethalani of the Sleth, her antennae twitching violently. The Terrans adapt faster than anything we have witnessed. Their strategies change daily. By the time we analyze one encounter, they have shifted to 3 new methods of war. The Varn delegate roared with derision, slamming his clawed fist against the stone of his dais. Adaptation is nothing without strength. A few stolen victories mean nothing. The Vorin will crush them eventually. But his voice carried less certainty than before. One by one, reports continued to flow into the chamber. Vorin colonies erupting in rebellion, inspired by broadcasts of human defiance. Commanders begging for reinforcements, their disciplined legions cut apart by enemies who fought like no species before. The proud empire was faltering, and the unthinkable culprit was Earth. The debate spiraled into panic. Delegates shouted over one another, each offering theories to explain what they could not accept. "They are reckless, nothing more," cried one. "Madness can only carry them so far," added another. "This is luck, not design." Yet with every protest, doubt grew sharper. At last, the High Speaker Vekthar of the Draelith rose to restore order. His massive frame loomed over the assembly, his voice booming through the chamber. "Enough," he roared. "We waste time with excuses. The fact is undeniable. Humanity resists the Vorin. Humanity defeats the Vorin. and we, the Council, must answer one question. Why? What do they possess that others do not? Dozens of eyes turned then, almost unwillingly, toward the lone figure who had not spoken. Ambassador Marcus Hale of Earth sat in his seat, weathered hands folded, gaze steady. He had listened in silence through the shouting, his face as unreadable as carved stone. Now, at last he rose. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. You search for strength. You measure reflexes, endurance, intelligence. But that is not where humanity's power lies. The hall stilled. We are not the strongest. We are not the fastest. We are not the most intelligent. By your measures, we should lose every war we fight. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But what we do better than anyone, what defines us, is that we learn. The word hung in the air like thunder. Hale stepped forward, his eyes scanning the sea of alien faces. Every defeat is a lesson. Every death, a teacher. We take what breaks us and forge weapons from the shards. We turn your strengths into our opportunities. We make your victories the foundations of our revenge. That is why the Vorin are losing. That is why you fear us. No one moved. Even the mighty Varn warrior who had mocked humanity earlier now looked away, his claws tapping nervously against the marble. Hale's voice grew quieter, but no less dangerous. Once we understand you, once we learn how you fight, how you think, then you cannot defeat us. Ever. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, the Council, a body that had ruled the galaxy for millennia, felt the creeping weight of something it had never known before: fear of humanity. The Vorin Empire, long feared as an unstoppable juggernaut, had expected Earth to fall within days. Instead, they found themselves locked in a war they could not control. For every world they occupied, resistance movements flared. For every victory claimed, 3 more defeats followed. And at the heart of it all were the humans scarred, desperate, relentless, turning the very weapons of their conquerors against them. It was not swift. Billions of humans died. Cities became ruins, forests became graveyards, oceans turned black with ash. Yet through it all, humanity refused to surrender. And with every passing month, they grew sharper. Captured plasma rifles became prototypes for human shock weapons. Salvaged Vorin fighters were re-engineered into hybrids that no fleet was prepared to counter. Tactics once seen as suicide became standard practice, because humans had learned when to gamble and when to strike. And then came the turning point. The Resistance seized a Vorin battleship, a vessel bristling with weapons and shielded by layers of armor. By all rights, the ship should have been impossible to operate. But human engineers and mechanics tore into it with manic precision, ripping out systems they didn't understand, bypassing safety locks, and rewriting codes. What emerged was no longer a Vorin warship. It was something new, something terrifying. When the refitted vessel, renamed the ISS Defiance, reappeared in the skies of Sol, humanity roared. The Defiance spearheaded raids deep into Vorin space, striking targets the enemy had believed untouchable. It was a declaration not just of survival, but of ascendancy. The Vorin began to break. Their fleets, once flawless, now hesitated. Their commanders, once arrogant, faltered in fear of the unpredictable. Colonies under their control revolted, inspired by human broadcasts that spoke not of victory, but of resistance, that every act of defiance was another wound to the Empire. And in the end, the unthinkable happened. The Vorin Empire surrendered. The council chamber was packed beyond capacity when the news was confirmed. Delegates sat in stunned silence as the message played. The Vorin High Command, once the galaxy's most feared authority, admitting defeat to a species that had been dismissed as primitives only years before. For a long while no one spoke. It was not victory that weighed on the chamber, but dread. If humanity could bring down the Vorin, what else were they capable of? Ambassador Marcus Hale stood again before the assembly. His face was lined with grief. No one could mistake the cost humanity had paid but his voice. carried the steel of triumph. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his tone quiet but cutting. "You measured us by your standards. You thought we would break because we were weaker, slower, less advanced. But we do not measure ourselves as you do. We fail, yes, but failure is not the end for us. It is the forge. It is how we learn, and once we learn you can never unteach us." Some delegates bowed their heads, unable to meet his gaze. Others stared with barely concealed fear, as though the very sight of him was a reminder of how wrong they had been. Hale continued. "The Vorin believed conquest was inevitable. They did not understand that inevitability does not exist for us. Every chain can be broken. Every limit can be surpassed. Every defeat is only a lesson preparing us for victory. That is what humans do better than anyone." Silence followed, deeper than before. And in that silence, the truth spread like wildfire across the stars. The galaxy had always prized perfection, perfect warriors, perfect thinkers, perfect hunters. But perfection was brittle. It shattered when faced with something it could not predict. Humanity, in its imperfection, had found something stronger. They did not break. They bent, shifted, and rose again. It was a lesson written in fire and blood, where others saw disaster. Humans saw challenge. Where others surrendered, humans adapted. Where others fell, humans stood once more. And in that truth, the galaxy finally understood why they feared humans. Not for their strength, not for their intellect, but for their refusal to stay broken. When the war ended, Earth was scarred beyond recognition. Cities smoldered, continents bore wounds that would take centuries to heal, and the human race mourned its dead. But the fires of war had tempered them. They were no longer a fledgling species standing uncertain among the stars. There was something else, something the galaxy would never underestimate again. The Council, once so quick to dismiss humanity, now spoke their name in hushed tones. Empires recalculated their strategies. Old rivalries shifted. Treaties were reconsidered, because the galaxy had learned the answer to the question that had haunted them for decades. What do humans do better than anyone? They learn.